Welcome to Without a Trace Show Review. Now, this video does not contain spoilers. I have done spoiler-written videos on the individual seasons, and those are linked in the description as part of a playlist. This is a long video, but there are time codes for different sections in the description box. And since I have made other videos on this, I'm going to try not to restate what I said there. And I got this as a gift, so anything negative I say in this is not out of bitterness. Now, I first watched this when it aired 17 to 10 years ago, the 7 seasons, and since then, since 10 years ago when it went off the air, I've only watched I rewatched the entire run over the last 6 months or so, but that's it. I haven't watched, other than that, it was about 10 years without me watching. And my opinion of this overall show didn't change with the addition of Rosalind Sanchez. And since I'm going to bring up violence, sexuality, disturbing content, I just want to make clear I don't have a problem with, I don't have a problem with any of those things. Monster is one of my favorite movies and has each of those things. So, yes, my own quote-unquote film critic rating for this is a 7 out of 10, and my personal rating is also a 7 out of 10. And I realize I'm a little late on this, but I hope everyone had happy holidays and safe New Year's Eve. And yeah, just briefly off topic, when talking about Smash Mouth, Wisecrack defined hedonism as wanting immediate pleasures, such as sex, chocolate, and puppies, and then says you shouldn't have all at once. I disagree. Puppies having sex with chocolate is very underrated. And College Humor just uploaded Badman with improved visual quality and effects, like they also recently did with the first season of Troopers. I really love both of these series, and Pete Holmes is a huge part of why Badman is such a great Batman parody. But overall, I would say an even bigger reason is Matthew J. McCarthy. I'm thrilled they gave him so many separate roles in the series because he does them all so perfectly. He does such great impersonations of the characters, and just, yeah. And I already forgot to start the timer, but I remembered now. And I just gotta briefly check how much time to add. So, let's see. Okay, I've been going for about 3 minutes. Yeah. So I'm just gonna make sure to write that down. I guess I'll also do, so yeah, there's no way this isn't going to be awkward, but explaining it is going to make it less awkward. I have some carpal tunnel, so instead of writing down the time codes, I will be recording them onto the smartphone. So I'm just going to quickly make a note. Add 3 minutes to each count. And that brings us to the first section. 110, plot. In New York City, there is a special unit of the FBI that specializes in finding missing persons, and it's made up of 4 to 5 agents, depending on the seasons, and their boss, Jack. Now, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to briefly add to the thing about how I haven't watched it in 10 years. For one thing, I stopped watching TV in the meantime, and I think they also stopped doing reruns not long after the run was through, or maybe it was there was a time when they went really crazy with like reality television shows. So yeah, I stopped watching. Excuse me, I'm just gonna briefly adjust the lighting setup if it'll let me. There and there. Excuse me. Now, I think it's very important for a great show to have rewatchability. Even after you've watched episodes from later seasons, you should still be able to enjoy episodes from earlier seasons. And, I record this 3 weeks after rewatching the very last episode, the season 7 finale. And in those 3 weeks, I rewatched 3 episodes from each season to allow me to better gauge how much the show has changed, among other things. So the day after watching the season 7 finale, I watched an episode from the first season, and I enjoyed both episodes immensely. There obviously there are differences. I don't think any show stays exactly the same over 7 seasons. And shows like this, later seasons can move faster and have more going on, in part due to the main characters being the same over the course. So you can have a more complex story with the main characters of the overall show in later seasons. Since we know them and we've spent a lot of time with them, things have changed over the course of the show for them, even if only a little. So yeah, the complexity is, you know, often greater in later seasons. But the early seasons, they make up for not being quite as fast and as complex as later seasons by having really strong atmosphere, and the mysteries still, a really great mystery, even after you know what the answer is, it's still appealing to, you know, go over it again once you know the answer and look at the hints towards the answer, and, you know, look at the red herrings and such. And, if you do that with a bad mystery, you're going to find it frustrating. You're going to be like, so all of this stuff is just red herring. Or you're going to be like, well, if it started with this, how could it possibly have gotten to that? That's ridiculous. Things like that. And with this show, I would say a lot of the time, maybe most of the time, that is true of the mysteries in the episodes. I'm not going to claim it's true of every single mystery. Now, this show has a strength over shows like Law and Order and CSI. This show does not open on a dead body. They open with us knowing that a person has gone missing. And while it's not always the case, there is at least some chance that they will be found alive. And that's one of the places where you see that, sometimes the show is very cynical and the person will be dead, and or they'll be intentionally involved in really horrible things. Other times it's very optimistic, and they'll find the person alive, and maybe some of the bad stuff that seemed like it might be true actually, yeah, turn out. Excuse me, I'm just gonna make sure there. Things like that. And since the person is just missing, there are a lot of different ways it can go. Was it a kidnapping? Did the person abruptly leave by themselves? Maybe they were a criminal worried about being caught. Maybe a criminal had a personal reason. A lot of the time, there's personal stuff going on. Maybe it was suicide. Maybe it was a murder. That does happen. And when the investigators talk to people who knew the person, it's not about what will happen when they know for sure who killed them. They might well have disappeared for another reason. And there are entire episodes, I'm not going to give away how many in this video, without anyone dying, turning up dead. And again, I'm not going to give away, I'm not going to give away how many, but there are episodes with literally no violence at all. And yeah, that's plural, so it could be 2, it could be 100. I'm not going to give away how many. And let's see. And of course, that doesn't mean that there aren't still criminals in a lot of episodes, and there is murder in episodes. It's just not always, that can be an that can be a way to grab the audience, is that, the missing person, we don't know what happened yet, but there is a murderer, someone threatened them or something. And yeah, since the let's see, yeah, just a brief, you know, when it's Law and Order and CSI, since it opens on a dead body, at the end of the day, there is for sure, you know, someone killed or did something that led to the death of at least one person, and that's very difficult to forgive. And there aren't a lot of reasons or cases where an intentional murder, where you can really empathize with the person who did it. There are some, but with this show, the yeah, with the show, the characters who are criminals, you know, yeah, sometimes the show and or the audience has a lot of empathy for how these people ended up being criminals. And empathy is the way to prevent people from becoming criminals. It's much more efficient than just punishing people who are already criminals. The yeah, just to briefly, part of what I'm saying, especially, is that some poor people become criminals because they feel like they had no other choice. Maybe they can't get work, or maybe they can't get a job that pays enough, and yeah, things like, the I realize a lot of people hate The Dark Knight Rises, but I do think there's, yeah. At one point, a character says, once you do what you have to do, they never let you do what you want to do. And yeah, and it is through empathy that we get legislation that helps these people, that ensures, for example, raising the minimum wage. I am still holding out hope that at some point someone in America will have enough political power to actually, yeah, and that's going to lead, that's going to prevent a lot of desperate people from doing the wrong thing because they feel like they have no other choice. Now, with that said, obviously there are criminals who we have to stop from committing more crimes, but prisons, especially private prisons, are not necessarily the best way to do that. And meanwhile, the openings of episodes can be utterly heartbreaking because we know that one of the people we're seeing is going to go missing, and sometimes it will be the person that we absolutely least want to see go missing. Endings of episodes can also be incredibly heartbreaking, even when it's a happy ending, which, yeah, sometimes some happy endings, some sad endings. And the the start and end of episodes can be very moving when you see someone tragically disappear, and then at the end of an episode, whether it's happy or sad, also very moving. Because at the very least you get closure. And the show can be tragic at sometimes, hopeful at others. You never know what you're gonna get. And as Jack says in the pilot, after 48 hours, they're gone. So we'll show how many hours they've been gone every so often in the episode, and it works as a ticking clock. And basically, if they are gone for more than 48 hours, likely they're dead or geographically so disappeared that the team can't find them. And that, yeah, this means that the team may be able to save someone's life in any given episode. They may be in risk of, I mean, basically, what it means is either no one has seen them in the, in the hours they've been missing, or whoever has seen them hasn't told anyone, which might mean that that person is a criminal, or if missing person is a criminal, then it makes the person lying about where they are an accomplice to the, if they disappeared while committing some crime. And yeah, there are a lot of different reasons why they might be missing. And I think I've seen at least one person say, obviously the title is a misnomer, because if there literally was no trace, there would be no show. Now, I've seen others note about the show, the stories can feel very sensationalistic. And I would say that violence, sex, and drugs can sometimes be handled on the show in an exploitative way. And, honestly, some of the sexual stuff is sometimes filmed to be erotic, even when this is in bad taste. And the episode's ending with a dramatic event in slow motion set to music. Some say they're too manipulative. I would definitely agree that they are manipulative, but I'm not sure I would go so far as to say excessively so. Maybe some of them. Now, let's see. Now, the show makes excellent use of licensed music, but sometimes a while will pass between any two episodes that have it, and occasionally the show will go outside of New York, but otherwise it is basically set in the one city, which, that is part of the idea here. They are looking for someone who went missing in New York. It would be pretty ridiculous with if this one team was responsible for, like, I don't know, and I mean, I'll grant that it is already somewhat unlikely that, you know a city as big as New York. I mean, yeah, it basically seems like this is the only real team in New York that does this kind of work. But it would be absolutely absurd if it was like, I don't know, a handful of states for one team or something. Now, but yeah, the show rarely goes outside. Occasionally goes outside of New York, and otherwise is set in the one city. From what I remember of watching Law and Order and the very, very little CSI and spin-offs, that is kind of how it is for these kinds of shows. Now, let's see. A number of times the show will spend the first 25 minutes of an episode with the agents trying to get to a specific person of interest or the like, and you're supposed to think that's the person who will lead them to crack the case, but instead there will be a flashback and the situation will be dramatically changed by this person of interest. Now, I watched the first 4 seasons of NCIS, and I honestly have no idea which seasons or how many episodes I watched of Law and Order. And CSI, I mean, I don't know, maybe 3 episodes or something, and I have no idea which of them. I've seen, obviously I'm aware that I forget which of them, but there's the one where, the guy will see the body at the start of the episode, make some one-liner, and, I don't even remember. I think he puts the sunglasses on rather than taking them off right after the one-liner, and then, rock music, opening credits. Now, honestly, considering how many episodes I did watch of Law and Order and NCIS, even though I didn't really like NCIS, I would definitely say I remember the episodes of this show much, much better. I definitely greatly prefer this show to those. And I did enjoy watching Law and Order, and I'm almost certain the only one I've actually watched. I might have watched one episode or something of one of the spin-offs, but otherwise, it's only the original that I've watched with, I want to say his name is Jerry Orbach, who I've always quite liked. And yeah, I mean, I think a big part of the reason I watched it all was the order part, the courtroom scenes. Now, sometimes an episode will end when they find the missing person, and it will only be at the very end of the episode. But sometimes the missing person will get a debriefing scene with the agents. Let's see, if the show people don't feel like the episode is emotionally over when the missing person is found. And sometimes it's very clear, like, for example, if it's a kidnapping, when they find the missing person, it's already like they've likely already found the person who did the kidnapping and know enough about that person to know why the kidnapping took place, and as such, it's not really necessary to see any further interaction between the agents and the missing person because we know. But if the missing person, if part of the reason they were missing was something they themselves were doing, it's possible that no one else has explained what they were doing yet. And an episode might end with the picture being taken off the whiteboard, which has a timeline gradually filled in as they learn more about what the missing person was doing at different times, who was affecting their situation, etc. And possibly the name being erased from the whiteboard, signifying that the case has now been closed since the missing person has been found. Now, the dynamic camera, the camera is, I guess I should say, a large percentage of the time the camera is moving. Maybe it's pushing in on someone, maybe it's slowly moving in a circle around the characters as they're talking about the case, especially when they're in the office and handing out assignments, talking about leads. And this is, again, like, I'll admit that I haven't watched that many, yeah, like I said, I've watched some Law and Order. I have watched some crime shows from before when this was airing, and yeah, I'm not saying that those are necessarily bad, but you can tell the difference. The fact that the camera is so frequently moving in this show does, yeah, it feels more dynamic, and yeah, the I'm not saying that this is necessarily more visually appealing and stylized than, for example, NCIS. That one does have a lot of camera movement as well. They started airing at the same time. Now, unlike CSI and NCIS, since there is no murder scene and not necessarily like physical evidence, like the they always start out looking at the last place the person was seen, but that doesn't always have any immediate like physical evidence. And yeah, the show doesn't have a lot of stuff of people going over evidence that's been found, at least not as much as, yeah, based on what I know and what I've heard as the murder-based shows. And such sequences can be very visual and add variety to a show. So in that regard, this is not as strong a show as those are. Now, occasionally there will be stuff like they have video and or audio that could give clues, and maybe they do find like shells or the like, excuse me, from a fired gun that they can have examined, and something that is visually like yeah, really grabs you is that when someone disappears or a flashback starts and ends, other times they will fade in and out of the location, and yeah, and sometimes they'll increase the volume on video or piece of audio they have, or maybe the video will, maybe they will look at the background of video and or still picture. Excuse me. Just gotta deal with this thing real quick. There it is. Excuse me. And this will, excuse me. Yeah, this will allow them to get clues from the, if there is a, what's it called, hostage kidnapping video, whatever. I think you know what I'm talking about. You know, ransom demand videos, that what they're called. Maybe they'll be able to see something, like, the yeah, like the background that it's shot against will be the kind of, yeah, it will have some fairly unique, yeah, I'm not sure you can grade the word unique, but whatever, some detail that they can go off now. And yeah, and this will provide clues that help them find the missing person. And again, that means it's a little, that adds a little more variety to the show. Now, the the show creators express in some special features that part of the idea is to, they are inviting the audience to try to solve the mystery along with the show. We're given information along the way that, yeah, sometimes you can figure out. I would say it fairly rarely happens that you figure out where the show is going, like, a long time before it gets to, before the agents themselves figure it out. And let's see. Yeah, and on rewatch, mysteries in episodes largely hold up. There are red herrings and misdirects, but there is rarely something in there that just does not make sense once you watch the whole thing. There are, here I'm not talking about NCIS and Law and Order, but in general, there are some mysteries in fiction where they kind of hope that you forget some of it along the way, because at the end, when you get the answer, some of the stuff you got earlier is kind of contradicted by the answer, but they had to, you know, they had to provide something to keep the audience engaged. And on this show, yeah, there are things that ultimately, well, that wasn't actually the answer, and sometimes it can feel cheap. But a lot of the time, they manage to make it kind of, it, it make it part of the overall, like, what's the word? Yeah, yeah, I guess I'm just gonna say, I would say overall, it doesn't really waste your time, and they do tend to be very logical, kind of, how did they, why they guessed that that would be it. Excuse me. Now, the missing person of the episode, persons of interest, and the like will sometimes go from looking innocent to guilty, and or vice versa, and sometimes more than once, and sometimes that can get a little tiring. And on a, let's see, yeah, on another DVD special feature, they talk about how executive producer Jerry Bruckheimer told the crew, even if you were channel hopping with the sound down, the show should always be visually arresting. And at the start of an episode, we'll see the person who disappears in the episode in the last situation before he disappears, and it will culminate in him fading out of the scene, disappearing in effect. And we won't necessarily see exactly what the last thing happens is, but it will be the last thing anybody else, as far as the agents know at the start of the episode, so the person that reported it or told someone who did report it saw or heard of them, so they might have been taken or killed after that. But yeah, I've already mentioned that sometimes someone else knows but is keeping it from authorities. And this is, of course, like there are a lot, yeah, you might say a fairly common assumption on the show. The agents will assume that criminals are involved in the disappearance, since that would help explain why the person is missing. And again, that doesn't always mean that something was done to the missing person. Sometimes it's a criminal doing something criminal with the missing person, but they do tend to treat, criminal persons of interest as if they know something, maybe were even directly involved. And, sometimes they aren't, sometimes they aren't, but they will very frequently have some new lead to pass on. And the reason that they didn't, give that lead, because this is, the once, I mean, it varies. Some episodes they go to the press, sometimes they don't or such, but they do tend to at least tell, police officers, if you see someone matching this description, they might be involved, so, bring them in or question them on the spot or something. So if someone that fits the description didn't talk to the cops, that, yeah, it frequently means that they might know something, but they were worried that they would, like, if they go to a cop and say, I know something about, this or that the cop would arrest them for, their most, yeah, for some crime that they've committed. And also, DVD special feature, they point out that the set design of the FBI office and its lighting setup allows them to do Steadicam shots without worrying about accidentally showing where the illusion ends, because it is a set, but they have it set up to where they can make it look like it's light out or dark out, and with a convincing, what's the word, like, I'm pretty sure this isn't what it's actually called here, but to give you an idea, rear projection screens, so if you look out of a window of these offices, you can see buildings out there, and that's not because there are buildings there, it's because they did, like, a background that you can see through the window. And sometimes the agents will keep going back to the same persons of interest. Sometimes there will keep being new leads that have them going to new locations, talking to new persons of interest. Some episodes are a combination of the two. And, like with at least other shows from this time, I don't know enough about shows today to say for sure, sometimes they'll put more money into some episodes than other episodes. And as such, yeah, some episodes will have more locations, more actors, bigger name actors and such, and and the kinds of scenes that require more work to get, action scenes, for example, are a lot more, you know, take a lot more time, skill, planning, and rehearsal and such than, dialogue scene. And yeah, there a lot of scenes on the show are dialogue scenes. I would say that given that there are flashbacks, I don't think there's any episode. No, there is no episode of the show that just has like almost no locations or only really boring locations. There's always at least, you know, excuse me, at least a couple, because the flashbacks will be to different locations and to kind of, and part of how they could accomplish that, even though they didn't have, they have a limited amount of time to film, is that the people involved in the flashbacks, a lot of them are people that the agents aren't dealing with right now. So, maybe they'll deal with them later in the episode, but at the time, comparatively, it would be, yeah, I don't know if, no, that's not really a spoiler. Yeah, the flashbacks don't tend to involve the agents themselves because they, if they already had contact with this person, they would already know more about where they were, very likely. But so yeah, instead, it might be that the agents will talk to, person of interest. Sometimes they only very briefly appear in flashbacks, and the other people in the flashback are ones who don't spend a lot of time with the agents, and as such, they could simply be filming some of these scenes at the same time. Excuse me. I've more or less said this already, but just, yeah, you can sometimes see twists coming. And sometimes they get the story to 40 minutes because certain witnesses didn't come forward sooner, persons of interest did not give all the information the first time they spoke to them. They do tend to have an explanation for this, but it is admittedly an easier way to get to 40 minutes than if they just, if, yeah, like hypothetically, if they said everyone who knows something immediately comes forward on the show, every person of interest immediately tells everything they know that could be useful, then a lot of these episodes would not be 40 minutes long, but there is, yeah, like, for example, sometimes a, the partner of the missing person will hide a secret that, involves the missing person or affects them in some way, if they feel that it is embarrassing and or they genuinely feel like that can't be why they're missing. And different agents will explore the different leads. And the agents will sometimes come across criminals and agree to not charge them if they agree with the cause, the methods, or if the criminals agree to give them information. And that's, how the show, there are a lot of scenes on the show where someone will say, the reason I didn't tell the cops, is this or that criminal thing. And the agents will very frequently say, I'm not here to arrest you about that. I'm just looking for this missing person. If you tell me something, I'm not going to pursue, the criminal thing you're doing as long as it doesn't affect the missing person. And, the show essentially plays it as a sort of necessary evil. You can't get them all. And more than once, blood and or fingerprints found near someone disappearing turns out to be someone punched someone, maybe only, maybe only even only once, but just enough to draw blood and put their hand on something, when obviously the first thing we think of is a death more than just a brief physical fight. And sometimes it'll be even less than a fight. There are times where it's just, something broke and they accidentally, like, the they were just trying to pick up broken glass and cut themselves or something. And obviously, both the audience and the agents immediately suspect, well, someone cut them. That's why there's blood. But it'll be, no, they accidentally cut themselves. And yeah. And sometimes there will be more than one missing person. Maybe the main, or maybe the main missing person is found partway through the episode, and then a different missing person is focused on for the rest of the episode. And the show does have some of the zoom and enhance cliche. And not every case is equally interesting, and some of them will only be interesting to a small segment of the population. Not saying those stories shouldn't be told, but there are going to be people in the audience who don't care about those episodes. I would say it does a pretty good job of telling stories that, yeah, where it's, the where it's about minorities, ethnic, maybe someone's a trans individual, yeah, various. Let's see. And in addition to some continuity between episodes, there are two-parters and some ongoing stuff. Now, since an episode needs some explanation for how the missing person remained unfound until the end of an episode, sometimes there are some convoluted and contrived dubious ways that they've stayed hidden. Some flashbacks are 2 minutes ago, and some of them are as far as decades ago. Some endings are anticlimactic, and there are a lot of red herrings, excuse me, where you think a character is basically a monster and turns out they're a complete puppy dog. Obviously, they have to keep surprising the audience, and they also want to have dramatic things happen. And certainly sometimes the dramatic things do turn out to be true. It's just that someone else did them. But when you spend that long getting invested in a character and a story, it takes a lot of the enjoyment out of it when you realize that a lot of it either didn't happen or someone else, and the character you thought you were seeing the hidden dark side of is actually Mother Teresa. They treat it like the character is the second coming of Jesus. And sometimes they will find forensic evidence such as blood, articles of clothing, and the like, and they treat that the way the CSI people treat their evidence. And some people say the show has emotional porn. I would say there is a fine balance to walk between deeply emotional, impactful, and emotional porn, and sometimes this does, you know, it tries to walk that balance. Sometimes it does slip into emotional porn. Excuse me. And the show handles important issues and is on the right side of them most of the time. Sometimes it's on the side of, sometimes it's against, sometimes it's even hostile to those without power and, various minorities. Sometimes the writing can be misogynistic. There are some positive messages that could really help make the world a better place, often promoted. Occasionally, whatever the opposite of promoted is, demoted. I don't know. And we get to see how the missing person became who they are, or how they got into the situation they're in, and very frequently we empathize with them. And the show very frequently asks the audience to empathize with people that, a lot of the time are not treated with empathy, and it tends to be very convincing. You do tend to end up empathizing with these people. And the show has great actors who are also great elsewhere. And some episodes put us right inside the headspace of the missing character. And this can especially be true of the opening scene, the very last thing that happened to them before they went missing. And the show is sometimes very direct about the real causes of major problems, such as drug addiction, starting out as taking prescription painkillers and then having trouble getting back off of them, and affecting white upper class people as well as poor black people. And let's see. I really deeply respect the ethics of the show. The fact that it cares about people who need someone to fight for them. I really wish more shows were like this. And I honestly don't remember. It's been way too long since I watched, you know. So I can't say if Law and Order does something similar, but at the end of the day, that show opens on a dead body, so you spend the 40 minutes waiting for a killer to be punished. Where on this show, it's more that you empathize with the person who's missing. I'm not saying that murders shouldn't be solved, and if someone is dangerous, then they need to be stopped. But far more of the world's problems require empathy and progressive politics. And there's a disproportionate, that almost sounded, I do try not to swear in these videos. There's a disproportionate amount of TV shows about catching a killer compared to all the problems that can't be solved like that. It appeals to, the lizard brain absolutely loves when there is at least one bad person and the episode ends with that bad person being stopped. That makes us think, that solves that major problem. But there are a lot of problems that are a lot harder to solve than that. There are a number of times a character will appear to be a pedophile and it turns out they're obsessed with children. They are obsessed with children, but not for sexual reasons. Especially frequent is the supposed pedophile will turn out to have lost a child and now, is obsessed with children who are similar. Maybe they want to replace the dead child. And at first this might seem like another example of the show's many anticlimactic elements, but I think the idea might be to get people who suspect others of being pedophiles without conclusive evidence to consider if maybe there is another reason for this person to be seemingly unhealthily interested in children. Just, yeah, hold off on, there's, if it looks like there might be something, it makes sense to investigate if there is something. But if there really isn't, if it genuinely seems like the person isn't, a pedophile, then it's extremely important not to judge them. There's a, it's of course it's difficult because there are a lot of people who don't believe victims. I would say the moment that someone comes forth and says this person victimized me, we should believe that. And but when there isn't evidence and it doesn't seem like they had a way to get rid of evidence that there might have been, then it's important not to prejudge that person. Now, yeah, I should just briefly say there are characters that do turn out to be pedophiles on the show, and the show doesn't really say that they are, they're, yeah, the show and the agents very clearly don't like and don't trust the actual pedophiles. One example, someone there's a scene in an episode of the show and where someone who is confirmed to be a pedophile is brought in for questioning, and they explain what you know the new situation they were in, which at first the agents thought to have to do with pedophilia, but turns out not to, and or at least not in the way they thought. But the the pedophile, recounts the flashback, and then afterwards says, "I haven't touched anyone since 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 I was released from prison," or something like that. And an agent will just deadpan to them, "I'm sure your victims are very relieved," or yeah, which excuse me, that's very frequently how the show treats those who have been confirmed to be pedophiles. Now, occasionally the show will have very unusual editing and cinematography, which can help breathe life into what otherwise could become somewhat samey. It also helps that the show features a lot of very different environments, and the filming and editing captures those environments. And an episode might feature a party or a celebration with a sense of fun. Maybe it has a person by themselves training or practicing for something important, and we could get a real sense of the pressure they feel to perform. It could be a racially charged confrontation where we can really get a sense of the pent-up frustration from experiencing a lot of these drugs, sex, violence, gambling, and many complex emotions that come with them. The pressures, sense of relief, feeling of victory, feeling of inevitability, and a lack of control over the situation. It really does. You really are put in the headspace of this person, and the start of an episode won't tell you what you know yeah the start of an episode is not going to tell you the exact reason why the person went missing, or like where they are now. It might seem like it, or at most the agents will then investigate this super obvious thing, and then the let me think yeah then when they get to where the missing person should be, based on this really obvious, the missing person will not be there, and there'll be a new lead directing. Yeah, excuse me, I'm just gonna quickly note there. And sometimes there are flashbacks within flashbacks, very Inception. And there are a number of episodes about how badly corporations treat employees. And sometimes law enforcement people on the show will protect each other, which is something that does happen, and sometimes the show presents it in a positive light, sometimes in a negative light. It does tend to veer towards empathy. If it helps someone, it's positive. And the further the show goes along, while there still is not, it's not all that frequent, but there is more torture and the, yeah, and yes, I'm afraid I do mean that the agents will do something that qualifies as torture. Now, I'm not talking about like, I'm not saying that it's, torture is never okay. What I'm saying is, I do want to make clear so you don't get the wrong impression. We're not talking like Gitmo, but the one episode has the someone who's in extreme pain denied painkillers until they talk, which I realize not everybody acknowledges that, but yes, that is a form of torture. It's more that kind of thing, denying someone something that they do need, such as medical attention. And yeah, I think that's the example I'm gonna go with to not give too much away. And it's very likely it's kind of trying to up the ante kind of thing. Now, one of the main issues with this kind of thing, I'm not saying that there are a lot of things that are wrong to do in the real world that are not wrong to put in fiction. The reason it's wrong to put torture in fiction is that this show, like, for example, 24, suggests that you can trust the information that you get from torture, which is far from. There are some times where that is the case, but yeah, I'm instead of trying to, yeah, instead of trying to phrase it myself, I'm simply going to, this is a direct quote from, I'm afraid I'm not certain how to pronounce this, Elise Soufan, a former FBI special agent with considerable experience interrogating Al-Qaeda operatives. When they are in pain, people will say anything to get the pain to stop. Most of the time they will lie, make up anything to make you stop hurting them, and that means the information you're getting is useless. And unfortunately, after 9/11, there were a number of shows that basically said, well, they rationalized torture as being a necessary evil. And, if it got results, if it got credible intel, maybe we could have a discussion. But it doesn't, so there's no discussion to be had. It is wrong. And another thing that I would say increases the further you get into the show is how many people the agents shoot. Now, it is almost always either in self-defense or otherwise to protect someone that they would shoot. And honestly, there are times where the agents are very careful to only injure the person with the gunfire. You know, rather than just shooting someone because they want to rather than need to. And and again, with that said, there is not that many people shot on the show, and it's often at most a single person per episodes with per episode, with several episodes with no man shot at all in between them. And the agents do treat it as the absolute last resort. They always try to talk people down, and the show doesn't glorify killing suspects or criminals. There will occasionally be some violence or threats against criminals played as cool, meant to be enjoyed by the audience. But no matter how bad someone is on the show, the agents always try to arrest them and make sure they get a trial rather than killing them, or even they're injuring them in a permanent way. And there are times when the agents are completely alone with suspects and might be able to do something before being stopped, even though they obviously wouldn't get away with it. and they still won't do it. They'll arrest but not hurt them. So the show does go for the obviously ethical way to approach that. Now, there are there are times where the show, yeah, early in the show, they very clearly treat it as there being psychological consequences to shooting someone. It's not some kind of, which is again one of the big problems in the depiction of violence in movies, TV shows, and such, is that it kind of suggests that there isn't really a psychological consequence for the person doing the violence, which is just not true. It's very rare for someone to be able to kill another person and not have any kind of psychological after effect. Early in the show, it does acknowledge this, and there might even be a storyline built out of, maybe even more than one, built out of a character recovering from that sort of thing. But later in the show, they do basically start treating it as though it's just, you know, not something that you really have to treat after effects of. And again, this is, at the end of the day, the longer a show runs, the more the TV shows do tend to get more extreme. They have to, or if they don't get more extreme, they tend to go in a very different direction than before. Because basically, they do have to convince people to stick with this show. And unfortunately, that is one of the things that comes from that. Obviously, it is a bit contrived that flashbacks always provide just enough information that they can get a little bit further, but not enough to solve the case until the end of the episode. And this show presumably exists in every CSI type show. It does strain credulity, sometimes past the breaking point, that all of these people are willing to admit damning things about themselves in the flashbacks, when often it turns out they aren't the person who's responsible for the missing person being missing. Yes, even taking into account that the people are scared of lying to the FBI, and even taking into account that sometimes the agents put a lot of pressure on persons of interest and basically threaten them that right now they're the best suspect. So if they don't give up useful information, they will be charged with a crime. There are still details that they include, even though some of them make them look incredibly badly and that others couldn't verify. Look badly. It's gotta be look bad, right? Badly, it's an adverb. To say that you look badly would be saying that the mechanism which allows you to look is broken. A lot of flashbacks will introduce a new character who will say something vague and or threaten the missing person, which can help the slow trickle of information that is, of course, necessary for these kinds of shows, which doesn't mean that the trope never gets old. And often they will end up finding, the agents find that person and say, but you threatened the missing person, and they'll say, yeah, but I was just emotional at the time. No, the person you should really be looking for is this person. And again, the focus shifts. And if you cut out the middleman there, if the first person just directed them to the third person, the show wouldn't get to 40 minutes. Now, sometimes right-wingers on the show turn out to be hypocrites or do something wrong that you would maybe expect them to do, or specifically expect them not to do. And sometimes it also happens to left-wingers on the show. And there are many relevant storylines. Not all of them are handled equally well. And as an example, it will sometimes deal with great injustice and imply or even outright state that it wasn't as black and white, and that you can understand how the unjust treatment is or might have been justified. And that can make for a juicy story, may provoke the audience, subvert expectations, and like. But media does affect perception, and this is one of the shows that could get people to think that something that is unjust actually isn't, that there is some, something that the person being hurt is doing that they should just stop and they wouldn't keep getting hurt. Let's see. On more than one occasion, agents will realize that a female person of interest is scared because of a man nearby, either a suspect or one of the agents, maybe simply because, could be because that particular man has threatened them, or it could be because they've had such negative experiences with men that they have a hard time, they are automatically more tense around men. And the agents will remove that person, and the female suspect will talk more freely. And the show isn't completely consistent in this kind of thing, but it is noteworthy that it knows that this kind of thing is the ethical way, as well as the way that gets results for those more cynical. That came out a little more better than I intended it to, sorry. There are a number of persons of interest who turn out to have lied about when they last saw a missing person, or some of the details of what they saw when they last saw them, and that can get a little annoying in the long run. It feels like an easy way for the writers to not give the audience enough clues to solve the mystery before the episode is nearly over. And the agents will get a person of interest into the interrogation room and suggest that they can put the person of interest away for a crime they don't have definitive proof happened, sometimes including murder. And overall, the show tends to conclude every case in the same episode as it's brought up, but there is at least one ongoing investigation, and I'd say that they handle ongoing ones quite well too. Sometimes the show really verbalizes the feelings and circumstances related to different forms of trauma quite well, of the people suffering the trauma, of the people who take care of the people who suffered the trauma, and also of the people who caused the trauma. There are scenes on this show where someone will apologize to someone that they hurt, and the show kind of, the show gets into, does that, does that help the person who was hurt, who was traumatized, and, is it cathartic for the person who confesses? Or it's not always a confession, who owns up to what they did. Over the course of the show, there are a ton of episodes where someone will have threatened or gotten in a fight with a missing person not long before the missing person went missing. And sometimes it turns out to be a big deal, sometimes it's a red herring. It is a bit too frequent of a cliche in the show, I would say. Now, as far as writing, acting, and chemistry go, the main character couples on the show I find to all be convincing and appealing. You believe that they would get together, and you badly want them to be able to stay together, even if that doesn't always happen. And sometimes you realize that they can't stay together forever, but you do kind of want that kind of thing to keep going, which I'm not going to get into examples here, but there are other shows where when you see, when you see someone, major characters in a couple on the show, you're maybe kind of uncomfortable by it, and you don't really want it to keep going. And sometimes those shows don't realize that, and they just keep pushing a relationship that's, I'm not saying that you can't put something unappealing on TV. I'm just saying you should know that it is unappealing. Now, the show is incredible at immediately putting you in a very specific world. There aren't a lot of comedic episodes on the show, but sometimes they can get really silly, and you know it's very tonally dissonant from the rest of the episodes, and it really stands out if you binge. If you only watch one episode of this per week, the way it was when it aired, it's maybe not quite as noticeable. But for the last half a year or so, I've watched an episode every single day, and when a really, really silly episode is sandwiched between more gritty episodes, it's very, yeah. And the show definitely does have the propaganda thing going on some of the time, but it's a lot less aggressive than many other shows like it. I'm just, yeah, I'm just briefly gonna. There's an episode of NCIS. I'm not gonna give away which characters, but there's a character who's about to shoot a suspect, and someone else says, if you wanted to shoot him, you should have done it while chasing him. Basically, he's not saying it's wrong to shoot the suspect. He's saying if you do it now, there are going to be consequences. You missed your window, basically. And yeah, that's just, yeah. And some have pointed out that in the later seasons, the plots get more far-fetched. And I would say true. As far as I know, that kind of thing happens with a lot of these shows. I'm not saying that's not an excuse. I'm just saying that's something to be expected. Basically, you shouldn't be too surprised, I guess is what I'm saying. If you start watching one of these shows, I would say, yeah, in my experience, as far as I've been told by people who've watched these shows, if you watch, if you keep watching past the first few seasons, that's going to happen, and that's something you have to be prepared for. And yeah, from my limited experience with these, some of these other shows, that is my, well, experience. They have to convince returning viewers that this isn't the same thing they already watched. This goes further, bigger, more extreme, darker, more intense, faster, more intense. And despite lasting for 7 years, you know, excuse me, being relatively recent, the and yeah, the context of being a TV show rather than a historical event. IMDb only has 82 reviews of the show, and there aren't that many critic reviews either. And now the IMDb reviews, if sorted by most helpful, they first go back and forth between very positive, very negative, and in between. But yeah, I do not understand why this has so few. Like, there are, I don't remember the number, but I'm almost certain there are way more IMDb reviews for a show like Married with Children, which, I mean, there was barely an internet, and I don't think IMDb existed when that show went off the air. That means that people bought sets, watched in syndication, or reviewed from memory. Whereas this, I mean, and that it, yeah, this you could review from when it started airing, and some people did. And there still aren't more than 82 reviews. I mean, it got pretty decent ratings, as far as I know. Would have gotten canceled way sooner than, right. And yeah, just briefly, that is the thing to know. I forget if I put that in this document. The show was, or I don't know, canceled. It wasn't renewed for an 8th season, so it doesn't really have an ending. but it also doesn't end on a cliffhanger. You know, the last stories of the show are basically resolved. It doesn't, yeah. And as I've already mentioned, this is a show that sometimes does cliffhangers. Yeah, you know, every single cliffhanger on the show is resolved. Now, I guess this didn't do well enough to have spin-offs, but it really seems like they very easily could have made some, based on different cities around America, like CSI, specifically focusing on certain types of cases, like Law and Order. I'm not saying there are no other missing person shows, but I am saying that a bunch of these other shows star psychic characters. I'm just relieved that there is at least this one that doesn't. I'm not saying all the ones with psychic characters are bad. I'm just glad we have some, at least one without psychic characters. Now, some breaks from the format are good and help keep things interesting. Others feel like they kind of wanted to make it into a different show than what it was. And I would say some of the tone stuff and kind of realism changed over the course of the show, but it didn't really become a completely different show at any point. Now, it maybe hasn't aged as well as other shows. As much as I hate to admit it, it is possible that the early seasons of NCIS have aged more gracefully than this. And again, for those, excuse me, for those not aware, this started airing in 2002, whereas NCIS started airing 2003. So there's not really a huge, like, yeah, season 2 of this was, you know, aired at the same time as season 1 of that, and so on and so forth. So, you know, if season 1 of NCIS aged more gracefully than season 2 of this show, you know, yeah, that means that that show did a better job of making a product that aged gracefully than this. And honestly, yeah, and I mean that, yeah, it is somewhat slow compared to more recently made detective fiction, such as Dexter and I'm Told True Detective. Maybe I'll watch it at some point. Don't hold your breath. Which does definitely move faster, juggle more plot and major characters, you know, budget, network versus cable, or and such are part of the reason why. And you know, the the fact that that has 12 episodes per season, whereas this has, you know, basically 24, and the I guess I shouldn't give that away. Yeah, you know, I mean, that show started only 4 years after this one did, and again, that means that there, you know, the let's see, yeah, the years 2006, 7, 8, and 9, you know, you could, yeah, you know, I have the I don't have all the seasons of Dexter, but I could put on, you know, an episode from that show from one of those years and from this show's from the same of that year, and that show is more like, yeah, I would have an easier time. As much as I love this show, I would have an easier time of sitting down and binging a bunch of episodes of that than this. I rewatched some episodes of Dexter more times and with less time in between viewings than this, and those still packed more of a punch to me than this. Yes, this show started 17 years ago, went off the air 10 years ago, but I still thoroughly enjoyed rewatching Married with Children, which started 15 years earlier, and Two and a Half Men, which started 1 year later. Now, since all the agents, including Jack, who's in charge of the others, handle all the different aspects of the case except for tech stuff and lab stuff, it will vary who's doing what, which increases, well, variety. I didn't realize I put quite this many jokes of that sort in this one. Yeah. Now, sometimes an agent will spend a very long time at the office, and or one agent will talk to a lot of persons of interest, and or one agent will interrogate suspects, and or one agent will follow the paper trail, etc. Excuse me. The show will sometimes make excuses for really harmful behavior, even by powerful people who could easily choose not to engage in it, and equate both sides of the political spectrum, which, to be fair, there was less public awareness about how, yeah, when this aired, there was less public awareness. The when there is very little difference between Democrats and Republicans, it's establishment Democrats rather than progressives who are incredibly far away from Republicans on almost all issues. And the show does say that the obvious suspect is rarely the perpetrator, since the episodes would be over rather quickly, and that is again something that is unfortunate. There was when yeah, there was at least one Republican voter who said about Brett Kavanaugh, I've watched enough episodes of Law and Order SVU to know that it's not the it's not the obvious suspect or something along with. I'm paraphrasing. And sometimes major characters will continue to do certain things that are stupid and dangerous, and the show does this for drama and intense situations and such. It can get frustrating, and some of the later seasons have events that really strain credulity past the breaking point. Now, let's see. I am gonna see if there's anything. Yeah, I'm just gonna skip through this because this has spoilers. And oh, let's see. Yeah, here we go. Some of the people working on the show says of an earlier episode, they didn't want to shove their politics down the audience's throats. They just wanted the viewers to think about what is being said. I would definitely say there are episodes that are preachy, but it's not all of them. And sometimes the politics are progressive, sometimes they're conservative. $120,000 main characters. The leader of the team is Jack Malone, and some of the crew, excuse me, said that they cast Jack at the very start and helped everything else fall into place. And Jack has very little patience for stupid suspects and tells them to their face how stupid they are. And Jack will frequently bend and even break rules if he believes it will mean finding the missing person sooner, and or making sure they will capture the suspect. And yeah, just maybe there will be investigations of his methods. And Agent Danny Taylor. Danny is very street smart. He can speak the language of the streets, which lowers the guard of some people, so he can get information out of them that the other agents would not be able to. And sometimes he's very comfortable, casually threatening legal consequences. Oh yeah, that was back when it wasn't every single episode. Yeah. Sometimes his temper gets the better of him as well. And over the course of the show, we see that the other agents either are the same way or become the same way. And sometimes he will get physical or very nearly get physical with suspects, especially if it's someone he despises. Martin Fitzgerald is the latest member to join the team, and at times he's the audience surrogate who gets stuff explained to him since he, like the viewers, only just joined, but he is very clearly capable. He's a bit of a ladies' man, or at least was, which sometimes comes in handy, but sometimes he expresses his views that persons of interest don't appreciate. And Martin and Danny get off on the wrong foot and sometimes don't get along. Martin transferred and has connections due to his father being a big deal, and sometimes behaves like a bit of a spoiled brat, but he doesn't want his father to get him ahead if he doesn't deserve it. And you can call a spade, and you can call Samantha a spade because she is a spade. Samantha Spade. And she sometimes judges male persons of interest very quickly. And yeah, it's not a spoiler. She does at one point confirm she was actually named after the Maltese Falcon Bogart character. And they originally had some trouble casting Samantha. And Samantha has nothing but contempt for men who cheat and believes, rightly obviously, that a divorce is the way to go for that kind of thing. And Samantha is not trying to be like a man, even though she has a job that many consider a man's job. Completely coincidentally, I very recently rewatched the movie Blackmail, the 1929 early Hitchcock movie Blackmail. And at one point in that movie, a cop literally says, yeah, right before uproariously laughing at how ridiculous the statement is, he says, "What's next? Women, female cops." So, yeah, that was 1929, but still. I love the character of Deborah Morgan, and I'm not using this comparison to make her look like a badly done character, or Samantha look like a more well-done character. But Samantha is almost nothing like Deborah Morgan, and I'm really glad we have both. Women who want to work in law enforcement can model themselves on either of them, since they are both dealing with being women, working jobs traditionally considered men's jobs. And I also do really appreciate that once Rosalind Sanchez joins the cast of the show, and for those who don't know and don't want to know, I'm not giving away when. For all you know, it's episode 2. I'm just saying, at the start of the show, she's not there. Yeah. Once she joins, there are 3 male agents and 3 female agents. And, in addition to that, we have 1 black character, and that character is also female, which, yeah, unfortunately, there are a lot of, I guess the way to phrase it is, there are nowhere near enough positive black female characters in movies and TV. It's gotten better since the show, and I'm not saying this show was the first one, Depending on who you ask, Uhura from the original Star Trek is an example of a. Anyway, I'm not getting into that. Don't worry. Yeah. And in addition to that, there are 2 Latino characters, and one of them is a woman. So the show has a pretty decent, it's pretty decent on representation. With that said, of the 6 main characters, 2 of them are white men. And one of the 3 women is also white, but it's a lot better than a number of other, yeah. Now, it is possible that they wrote and cast the role of Samantha Spade to have an attractive woman in the main cast. You know, the when they cast her, she had just gotten done. You know, she came off playing Marilyn Monroe, and actually she came in with platinum blonde hair and had to tell them, don't worry, I'm not, I'm getting rid of that, I'm not going to keep being, but they did cast, the and while for the role of Danny they had written the character as more gritty and kind of, what's the word, a a brooding kind of, when, I'm afraid I don't remember his name. Like I've said, all the main cast do great. When the actor went in, he played the role in a very different way, and they liked that so much that they changed the character so that he could play the role for one thing, and that he could play the role that way for another. But with Samantha Spade, they did, yeah, they asked for attractive young women to come in. But you never get the sense that she isn't completely capable as an agent. Right from the moment you first see her, the way she carries herself makes it clear she is smart and driven. You know, despite being attractive, she doesn't dress, look, move, or talk like a supermodel or something. A lot of people don't think that attractive people can be anything other than basically just shallow supermodel people. She doesn't try to make herself look unattractive. She looks professional, comes across as professional. The show does acknowledge that she's attractive. Some shallow guys, persons of interest and such, will hit on her, and she always takes it in stride. It's very obvious that she's experienced it before, and she's determined that simply carrying on is the best way to respond. There's no, she's not like stunned by that, or and she doesn't make a very big deal out of it. She points out, she'll sometimes point out that that's completely irrelevant and demeaning, but yeah. Now, the other agents all respect her, and even at their weakest, they never express considering her just a pretty face, and thus it is reasonable to assume that they do not. There are, some of the other agents have moments of weakness where we'll see that there is something about them that they try to keep hidden, but that's never, yeah. And, if any of the fellow agents consider a relationship with her or do get in a relationship with her, it's clear that it's not just because she's attractive, it's because they consider her their equal. I appreciate that an argument could be made that they shouldn't have put someone pretty in the main cast of the show. I respectfully disagree. I think it's important to have attractive people be treated as equal to others when they work to be smart. On Star Trek's Voyager, 709 was definitely dressed and sometimes filmed and written in a way that would make people focus on her appearance, but she was also a deeply complex and compelling character. By far one of the best characters in all of Star Trek. The writing, her acting, a lot of things came together to really help elevate her above an attractive girl. I do wish that they didn't dress and film her like that, but ultimately, Jeri Ryan is incredibly talented. I remember hearing that, when they cast her, they realized some feared the show was becoming Baywatch. And due to how intelligently her character was handled, it never did. Now, that brings us to Vivian Johnson. I don't think there's a specific reason for this, but Vivian is the only main character that I didn't originally organically make a note about. I went into detail on her in thoughts videos, but I don't know, just for some reason I didn't. Yeah, and but yeah, she has a teenage son who sometimes gets in trouble. Overall, he is a great kid. Vivian works very hard to make sure that no one has any reason to do as a lot of people unfortunately do, look at a black woman who has a kid and believe that they're a bad mother. In a lot of ways, she's the most responsible, mature main character. That might sound like she's boring. Trust me, she's not. She can be very maternal. Now, that brings us to Elena Delgado. And she's played by Rosalind Sanchez. And I'll admit, I don't know very much about her outside of this show. I think I looked her up. Was she in one of the Rush Hour movies? I don't remember her at all. But I mean, I honestly don't really remember anyone but Jackie Chan, and I don't even remember his name right now. But the black guy. Anyway, in those movies, it's been a long time since I watched any of them. It's possible that she's gotten better at some of the things that I'm going to criticize her for, but when she joined the show, it's very clear that English is not her first language. That by itself doesn't have to be a problem. And I'm not saying that you're somehow better if English is your first language. However, she has to put all of her effort into pronouncing the words correctly, and thus not really any there's not really any, I don't know, energy remaining for her to use on acting. And this is similar to what happened with Halle Berry trying to do an African accent in the first X-Men movie. It's not. I've seen Halle Berry give incredible acting performances, including in X-Men movies. It's just when you have to, this is already a show where the agents have to say long sentences filled with complicated words where you know that's the nature of this kind of show. They deal with these very, you know yeah, just, it's, if you already are working hard to pronounce English, it's also very clear. I don't know if she was self-conscious about her accent or she had been told, but it's very clear that she's putting a lot of effort into suppressing her accent when speaking English. It's very, very clear. If she was more casual about it, she would have an accent, a very clear, distinct accent when speaking English. I don't know if it was her decision or someone else's. Someone made the distinct decision that she should not have an accent. And a lot of effort goes into not, but yeah, the someone playing an agent on this show may have to briskly walk into the scene and very quickly deliver lines like, we have triangulated the coordinates and put out an APB for the suspect. They know exactly what car they're driving, and I just got off the phone. These really long, complicated, and they have to pronounce them correctly, say them in a way that makes us believe that they know exactly what they're talking about, and this is not new to them. And once she did all of that, there simply wasn't really, yeah, there just wasn't any energy left to put into the acting. And I occasionally, I would say, occasionally it also comes across as if she doesn't completely understand what she is saying, or maybe just is neutral towards it, doesn't really have an opinion about what she's saying. And yeah, it just I feel bad for her. I ultimately I do think that she should probably have just either her or someone working with casting should have acknowledged that when she joined the show, she simply wasn't sufficiently used to speaking English that she could handle what the role required. And yeah, now, but yeah, you know, the yeah, to move on. In at least one episode, she speaks Spanish. I do think that her acting is better when she speaks her native tongue than English. I really do think that's a big part of the problem with her acting. And thankfully the Spanish was translated with subtitles. Otherwise, I would have no idea. I would have no way of judging if she's doing a good job acting, if I don't understand what she's saying. And it's but she did a good job acting. When I read the subtitles, it was like, oh yeah, that is definitely what she believes what she's saying there, at least more so than otherwise. Yeah, still not amazing acting, but and she also seemed so much more comfortable. It was like just it's like okay, completely random example. Bo Burnham years ago did a music video for his song "Oh Bo," which, among other, there are a number of people appearing in that video. One of them is this, I would say maybe middle-aged man who is somewhat overweight. And when a lot of the times when he's in a shot, it's very clear that, you know, I'm not sure it's that the actor himself is self-conscious, but they told him it would be funny if he did this. But he's holding his breath to try to look more fit than he is, and he's trying to also like smile and look, be appealing. And I mean, no offense to people who have problems with their weight, but it's very clear that he's not comfortable, and he is putting in a lot of effort to come across a certain way. And it just it yeah, you can tell when you're watching, that they're putting in a lot of effort. And it's yeah. Now, let's see. I remember seeing, I don't know, a review, or maybe it was on the IMDb boards back when those existed. Someone questioned why they would make the new agent a minority since they already had two women, one of them black, and one of the three male agents wasn't white. He was Latino. Why make the new agent Latina? I mean, among other things, the setting is New York, which is very varied when it comes to ethnicities, so I don't know. And let's see. Yeah, to expand on what I've already gone somewhat into, the long sentences full of complicated words, Rosalind Sanchez has to put all the effort into pronouncing them correctly and keeping a smooth flow to the sentence, and there's just no room left for her to also put in inflection. I don't blame her for having trouble. It is, you know, I mean, I tried learning Spanish once and it did not go well. So I no, it is very difficult to learn a different language. Some people say that I'm really great at speaking English, and thank you. I learned English at the same time as I learned my native tongue because when I was a kid, all the good cartoons, with very few exceptions, I believe Batman the Animated Series was translated, was dubbed into my language. But other than that, all the good cartoons were in English. So I learned by watching a lot of cartoons, and when I ran into a word I didn't know, I asked my parents, who are, among other things, well, yeah, fluent in English, teachers who teach students languages other than their own, and really passionate about me learning other languages than my own. So, but it's really, really different. I tried learning French. I mean, I think I did a decent job learning Latin, but I mean, Latin is the basis of so many other languages. So if you already know the logic of those languages, it's just. But anyway, I had a hard time learning Spanish. I had a hard time learning French. I It is very difficult to learn a new language, and as far as I understand, she basically, when she learned English, she was already an adult, and that can be very difficult. If you get it, if you learn the language you learn when you're a child is just it's difficult. I'm not sure. There are there are some circumstances where there are other languages you later in life come to be more comfortable with. If you learn another language and then you move to a country where they speak that language, so you almost only ever speak that language and don't speak your native tongue, then you do become more used to that. But otherwise, yeah, people do tend to have a much easier time speaking their native tongue. I just feel like she should have been, you know, she and the casting people should have been honest enough to realize, she's not yet, you know, sufficiently used to speaking English that she could handle as demanding a role, excuse me, as the show gave her. You know, I mean, there are one-off episodes that have a single character who only appears briefly. I can imagine that some of those might have had to learn a language or a body language or something that was very different. Yeah, just recently I rewatched an episode where the guy was this like genius level mathematician kind of thing, and there's at least one scene where he explains a math thing, and he's got the blackboard which he points to stuff and writes new stuff and such, and is explaining it to another character. It's entirely possible that that guy doesn't know. He basically he only knows what he needs to know for that exact scene, because he only has to do that scene. But if you have to do one episode after another, you have to be very good at this sort. I am in awe of the actors who played Jack and Samantha, because they're actually Australian, and the actress who plays Vivian, because she's actually British. And all three of them are playing American characters. So I can't think of a single time where I heard their accent slip. That's incredible. But that but yeah, the if Rosalind Sanchez had played a character who only ever spoke Spanish, and or she was a one-off character, I think it would have basically been fine. But as it is, yeah, yeah, just I've seen some say that the entire show went downhill when they cast her. I disagree. To me, it's only really her scenes that suffer, but that is still a lot. Now, and honestly, I also noted there were times where it's, she's not saying anything. It's just her. We see, like, maybe she's listening to someone else explain something, and you just see her face. She's not half bad. She's a lot better there than, yeah, and I've seen some say that she comes off as cold, hard to empathize with. I guess I can kind of understand saying that based on early episodes, but honestly, from at least the let me think. I should be careful about this so as to not spoil when she's on the show. I guess there's not really any way for me to. Okay, so I'm not going to say exactly when. I'm going to say that for a lot of her screen time, I would, yeah, you absolutely 100% believe that she cares. And again, her acting and her English get better the longer she is on the show. It's that's the kind of thing, like, either you get better at it or you just, like, you reach a point where you just can't go any further. You either you when you spend that long with doing that kind of thing, either you get better or it just becomes too much. And I would say that by the end of her run on the show, so I'm not giving away how long that run is, I would definitely say she does a lot better. And I guess I can see what they mean, about cold. I don't really see it that way, but I'll expand on that in a few seconds. But yeah, later in her run, she comes off as very loving, and yeah, she yeah. I think what they look at it and say she comes off as cold. I look at it and say she's so wooden and unconvincing. I don't see a cold character. I see an actor who's unconvincing. You know, for as many people hate her character and for how deeply they hate her character, I am very relieved to see everyone that I saw in reviews say, they wish she wasn't on the show. They only ever go as far as saying that they wish her character would be killed off. It's beyond disgusting when people wish for the death of people who might not be talented, but certainly aren't harming anyone. And that brings us to the next section. 150-10 on characters. The leads are all quite likable. I wouldn't say that of all the NCIS main cast, for example. Also, unlike that show, on this show, they're not really very quirky. They do have some personality and interpersonal conflicts and some continuity from that. And let's see. Yeah, I would say they're more subtle, where on NCIS, the leads and returning supporting cast are constantly screaming their quirks at this guy. That's not the only thing I really disliked about the show, but that got grating after a while. I'm very impressed with this show not becoming quirky, because rewatching the early seasons, I realize now that over the course of the show, all of the agents did become less subdued. They never got quirky, but Jack became a lot tougher with a more gravelly voice. It's like, if you have the option, like, I don't care if you've got all the seasons on DVD like I do, or if you have access to some kind of streaming, try comparing the voice of Jack in, I gotta be careful again, in the first, yeah, just the first season, it doesn't even have to be the first episode, to the last season he appears in. Or even, you don't even have to go as far as that, but just, wow, his voice changes a lot. It, again, like I said, I watched, within 3 weeks, I watched episodes from the entire run of the show, and it was very noticeable, especially going from late seasons back to early seasons. And Vivian's Bronx accent got a lot more pronounced. See, she's not just like, what's the word? Repressing, I guess. She's not just repressing her British accent. She's putting on another accent. It's not just a neutral accent. She has a very distinct Bronx accent. It's there from the start of the show. It's not something that just, but later in the show, it got way pronounced. And Danny's charm really gets turned up. Like, early seasons, they really go for a gritty and, like, what was it, like, I think I saw a reviewer call it poker-faced acting, kind of, not expressing a lot. And I would say there was always something. It was never nothing. Although with Elena, it was more that we could tell from other characters that she was supposed to, excuse me, there was supposed to be something there. It wasn't there in her acting from right away. Now, let's see. Yeah, and how do I know that the Vivian actress has, was it Marianne Jean Baptiste or something like that? How do I know that she has a pronounced British accent in real life? Because in the DVD special features, she's the only one where, from listening to her, I can tell, okay, definitely not American. She's got, like, really, really distinct, like, I'm never gonna be completely nonplussed about that sort of thing. Like, it doesn't, like, keep me awake at night, but it is like the wow, that's what they sound like in real. Just, yeah, it's wild to me sometimes. In interview, in interviews, I can't tell that Jack and Samantha, I don't know, maybe they just make an effort to keep the, if they did these interviews in between scenes of the show, okay, maybe they didn't want to drop the neutral American accent that they had, but, like, Australian accents, I'm not saying that as an insult. I think some Australian accents are very appealing, but Australian accents are very easy to recognize. Australian and New Zealand, you can really tell that, yeah. But yeah. Now, and yeah, this also has this fairly small, main cast with yeah, yeah, 4 to 5 main agents, and then their immediate boss. And, excuse me, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna give away the, yeah, but there is some returning supporting cast, but I guess, yeah, I guess I can't really go too much in. I guess what I'm saying is yeah, from what yeah, the the 4 years of the first 4 years of NCIS that I saw, and from what I hear about CSI and the like, yeah, those have a bigger cast, and the cast, they really put in an effort to make sure that you remember these characters in between, and even to the point where some people have pointed out, would this person really be working in a job like this if they're so different from the people? Would people keep working with someone who was that, who behaved that weirdly? And yeah, let's see. all of the acting, even child actors, is excellent. Again, with the Rosalind Sanchez is really the only exception I can think of. And again, I don't have any problem with her, like, the let me think. I Yeah, let me just blanket statement. I don't think less of someone based on where they're from. If you say something awful, I think less of you. But I don't think less of you if you have an accent, or if you know, yeah, I, yeah, that's all I have to say about that. A lot of the actors have to play their character in countless distinctly different situations. A lot of the circumstances that lead to people going missing are dramatic, but in addition to that, also before they went missing, many of them seem either really distinctly happy or sad. If the character's successful, or etc. If the character's successful, maybe we'll see them before they got successful. Some rich characters we'll see back when they were poor, at their job, in school, with friends and family, etc., by themselves sometimes. And if a character has a child, maybe we'll see them pregnant, maybe we'll see them finding out they're pregnant, deciding to get pregnant, working to adopt, etc. It really, like, deeply, deeply impressing how the huge variety. And yeah, and I guess some of them aren't equally convincing in all of these different situations, but all of them are convincing at least some of the time. I've seen others note about the show that even when you spend a lot of time with them, the characters don't feel like you know them, which others said, but I do feel that way about Law and Order. I don't think I really agree with that. I guess I can kind of see what they mean, but I don't agree with it. I do think it's worth noting, maybe you will agree with it. Now, like other shows and movies, the show will sometimes treat the law like something that's in the way of justice, and characters will go into a house without a warrant, talk to a suspect without the lawyer present, etc. Maybe they worry that a suspect will escape if you realize that she should ask for a lawyer. Maybe they'll lie to a suspect rather than worry that someone will not be aware of their constitutional right to a lawyer. And at least once we see that they've recorded people without their knowledge and use what's on the recording for cases, and there's at least one instance where a suspect comes back and is a further threat because they're released from custody due to their rights being violated, which, yeah, that does send the distinct message to the audience that these rights lead to dangerous people being released. They will sometimes lie to suspects, separate suspects they believe acted together to divide and conquer. And let's see. Compared to how many episodes there are overall, it is fairly rare that the show does take this position. Most of the time, the team follow procedure, and that proves to be enough to find people and stop crime, so that's good at least. Now, they will sometimes pressure someone by pointing out something illegal they have done that the FBI are not interested in them for, but could go after them on, so that they will talk, even though they're not usually the kind to talk to law enforcement. And as far as we see, the FBI agents are true to their word and do not go after them on the other things they've done. Of course, sometimes that does mean letting criminals go that the viewer would like them to go after, which also points to that it's an imperfect system. Let's see. And yeah, I've already mentioned Early in the show, it will go into that an agent shooting someone, even in accordance with the law, can have repercussions psychologically and such. But yeah, later in the show it becomes much more commonplace, and there's really no consequence for it anymore. Sadly, it would appear that the writers figured audiences had more of a hunger for seeing suspects shot than for seeing the toll that that kind of thing can take on agents, and since this consistently got pretty good ratings, they may have been right about that. And let's see. Occasionally, suspects will commit suicide, even in front of agents, and it's never depicted as something that they should take any pleasure in, nor that the audience should. It's clearly preferable to arrest them and have them face trial and legal punishment. And let's see, they show psychological evaluations for that kind of thing after that kind of thing as a necessary frustration, not even a necessary evil. And sometimes they compare a voice recording with an active phone call or another voice recording to identify the person, or at least figure out if the two sources are the same person. Now, there will sometimes be contrivances. A character will have done something that basically is... what's that say? Yeah, that basically is bad and has consequences, but at the same time, the show needs the viewer to not lose sympathy for that character. And let's see. Yeah, it gets pretty contrived, and I guess, yeah, I shouldn't give these examples. Yeah, there are a number of accidental killings where characters will punch or push someone and it leads to their death, even though it's contrived. Maybe their head hits something hard when they fell, excuse me, even though otherwise what was done to them shouldn't have been fatal, like a rock, or maybe they have asthma and prevented from breathing for just long enough. Now, yeah, when the writing is contrived, that might be the single worst aspect of the show, which, to reiterate, I do still love. Yeah, and there's something that happens in one of the last seasons, excuse me, which is just absolutely ridiculous. And yeah, now, a number of times characters on the show, such as the missing person, will be emotionally hurt because another character said or did something that is socially acceptable but hurtful. Maybe they'll be overly honest. And let's see. And frequently this will be done in a moment of weakness, and this character will be overall a good person. And all of this does, of course, help support the view that the show will sometimes have that individuals are good and there may be a few people who do evil, but otherwise it's systems and ideas that are evil. And let's see. And since it may just be a system, since there may be no actual crime committed, some episodes will pass without any arrest, and despite the episode making it clear that this is an evil system, that awful things happen in this situation, the agents won't be able to do anything about it, and the audience is left with the realization that this kind of thing is going to keep happening. And yeah, just the that kind of thing can help encourage people to take action to improve things on their own, where what's the word, the I will grant that sometimes action can be encouraged by stories where there is a single evil entity whether or not that evil entity is stopped by the end of the story, but that kind of encourages identifying the evil entity and going after that specific one, whereas this encourages identifying the systems that are bad, and the show will even help by the end of the episode, what system is to blame, and encourage activism to improve that system. Over the course of an episode, your perspective can change a lot, and a lot of times on what kind of person the missing person is, whether they did something truly awful or deep down a good person. The missing person of the week come in any age, ethnicity, and not all of them are straight or cis. Sometimes the missing person will be in bad taste, including very, very small children or pregnant, very, very pregnant women. And occasionally there will be more than one person missing in an episode, or the focus of the episode won't be as much on the person missing as a related situation, such as a hostage situation. And given the nature of the core concept, this does, of course, have lots and lots of scenes of characters being confronted with uncomfortable truths about the person missing and or the people related to the case, and of course, many of them deny that it could be true, or otherwise, it can get kind of repetitive from episode to episode. I do think that the flashbacks, once they get past that part, do tend to remain, they keep coming up with interesting scenarios to flash back to. Sometimes very psychologically accurate writing on the show for the various ages and environments. Very realistic about a lot of situations, environments, and such that it depicts, showing the unappealing aspects. And let's see. Sometimes hypnosis is used by characters on the show, but it tends to be credible, accessing memories buried deep within the subconscious, not going into pseudoscience territory, as stuff with hypnosis very often can. And flashbacks reveal plot and or character. Maybe some of them contain lies, or someone misremembers something. Maybe we'll see the same flashback more than once, and because of new information, it will look different. And sometimes the flashbacks on the show, the person telling the characters what happened couldn't have seen and heard everything that the audience sees in the flashback. And it's not, obviously sometimes the show gets around that by, after that happened, one of the, someone else told the person who's telling the agent something causing a flashback, but there are times where they don't use that, and sometimes we're just left watching something and thinking, well, they can't possibly have heard and or seen that. Now, and different people react differently to people close to them going missing in the show. Sorry, and the show has a lot of people finding out about their spouses, children, and parents. So yeah, if you do watch it, be prepared for a lot of, characters saying, I can't believe you would say or ask that, say or ask that. Obviously, that is not the case. I know the person you're talking about very well, and they would never, etc., etc. Now, this is another quote from a special feature. Excuse me. A person goes missing at the start of an episode is a blank slate. You don't know who they are, but over the course of the episode, as the FBI agents go looking for them, let's see. yeah, what it ends up being about is talking to people that know them, looking at their financial and phone records. Financial because maybe somebody just paid them for something illegal, maybe they just withdrew a lot of money for example, drugs. Phone records because maybe somebody threatened them and now acted on it, or they tried to get away from where the person could carry out the threat. Maybe they had a conversation with someone figuring out when to leave together, etc. The mystery about the person is that, let's see, yeah, is uncovered. That's it. Yeah, inevitably the reason that the person is missing is somehow related to some secret they have in their life, and so from that template, they are able to tell emotionally and psychologically complex stories that also have a thriller element in them. And the actor playing Martin points out that although the show doesn't go into the homes of the agents, it does go into who they are as characters. And sometimes one of the agents will relate very closely to someone involved in a case, which can both help the case and develops their character, provides background on them for the audience. It's not a huge surprise that some of the agents have tragedy in their backstories. That's why, you know, maybe they experienced something awful and they said, I'm going to try to prevent that from happening to anybody else. Or they can't do anything about the tragic thing that happened to them, so they try to do good in the world. Now, every every so often there'll be an episode where something will happen that further develops one of the agents, and some of these very personal ones are very dramatic and really define the people involved. I would say they don't hit the viewer as hard as when dramatic things happen to the leads on other shows. Again, for example, Dexter, or as for the guests on this show. And some of the early ones are background and aren't all very dramatic. But some of the ones over the course of the show get as dramatic as regular episode cases. And maybe some of them even are regular episode cases. Maybe someone related to one of the agents goes missing. Excuse me. And there's a real theme on the show of the powerful treating the powerless as badly as they can get away with, and sometimes even worse. I appreciate that every so often there will be an episode where one of the agents especially hate or especially have sympathy for a person of interest. And among other things, it goes into that, I guess, medical emergencies and situations where where health insurance won't cover the cost. Sometimes the agents temporarily lose self-control when dealing with a person of interest, and sometimes when they are completely in control, they may pose as having a different personality than they actually do in order to affect the person of interest. One of the guys will pretend to be sleazy if they're dealing with a sleaze bag. One of the women will pretend to be submissive and scared if dealing with someone that will be empathetic towards that. I'm speaking specifically of, I'm not talking about undercover. I'm talking about when they approach them as FBI agents. I guess, I'll just briefly say the show will do some stories that have undercover kind of stuff, but this is not really a show you should go to for that specifically. If that's the main thing you're interested in, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are shows that are specifically about undercover stuff. The Wire, I'm guessing based on the name, The Wire, at some point I'll probably watch it, but yeah, this is the show if you want to see, federal agents looking for a missing person without psychics. that is something you get all over the place with this show. Yeah, the main characters have reasons for being FBI agents and looking for missing persons, things they were involved in when they were younger, possibly against their will. Over the course of the show, you learn details about them. They want to protect people from the circumstances that befell themselves sometimes. I would say that this show, I'm not going to spoil anything about Lost, but I would say Lost, sometimes a character on the show would be so popular that they would be on the show after their central conflict had been resolved. And yeah, it ended up feeling, and there would be character traits that were forced and such because they were popular. I don't think that really happens on this show. There are a couple of, there are definitely some storylines where it's like, okay, clearly people wanted to see these characters either get together or split up or something. But there really isn't, like, there are characters where, an episode of the show will, will get the exact, yeah, this is why they are who they are. And maybe they even can get some catharsis for that, but they don't feel like there's no longer a reason for them to be on the show. Occasionally, a case will actually involve someone in the personal lives of one of the agents, which can, of course, feel much more impactful than other episodes. That was very close to something I already said. Sometimes I forget what I've already written. With a few exceptions, if a certain side character doesn't appear in the subplots plots of one or more of the main characters, then that side character doesn't get to have subplots, and that's not true of all. I've seen shows where there are, but yeah. Excuse me. I've already mentioned that sometimes it can be misogynistic, and here I wrote some more details on that. Occasionally, the show will have messed up characterizations of women. Some of them for major characters, some one-offs, some in between. It will characterize women as duplicitous, shallow, stupid, as their femininity and feminine traits being inherently inferior to masculine traits. These are things that can sometimes, unfortunately, come from a show with a sort of, I don't think it's right, but it is unfortunately the case that a lot of people think of the stuff that makes a police work as very traditionally masculine. That if, by definition, you have to be masculine in order to do it. And if you're traditionally not masculine, then you have to put in an effort to, whereas those who are traditional masculine would have an easier time of it. So yeah, sometimes that can lead to the, yeah. Excuse me. 220, 30 action types. Now, this does have a few chases, there are some, yeah, compared to how long the show is, I would go with the word a few words. A few chases on foot, shootings and shootouts. More of the time, at least every few episodes, has one or more scenes with a lot of tension and suspense. Occasionally there will be undercover situations, hostage negotiations. Mostly the way the show gets you to watch carefully is not with a lot of action or hints that there will be action, but rather it's the thrill of solving the puzzle or watching it be solved, and the kind of the complexity, getting into these very different worlds. Fundamentally, fiction is a tool to explore worlds that you don't, excuse me, personally explore. Yeah, to go with a fairly non-controversial one, it's a lot healthier to learn about drugs by, you know, I'm not saying, you know, not the really alarmist ones, ones that are really honest about it. I remember Trainspotting as being very honest and coming from a place of actually knowing rather than just, you know, alarmist kind of, you know, war on drugs propaganda kind of thing. But it is better to learn about drugs via fiction that is good at exploring it rather than you yourself actually becoming really addicted to some really powerful, yeah. And you know, I'm not everything on the show is like that, but there are a number of worlds on the show that most people don't experience. Now, in a lot of early episodes, the puzzle is ultimately pretty logical and you can understand how it went once you've seen the whole thing. In a number of later episodes, in order to keep you guessing, there will be something very contrived. Maybe an element necessary to solve the puzzle will be hidden or obscured, and it can feel unfair to the viewers trying to solve it ahead of the show. There are a number of times where agents will bust down a door, otherwise, you know, rush into a place looking for a suspect. There are some scenes of SWAT teams, you know, such involved surrounding places and the like. And let's see. Yeah, we're told in one episode that the team have a special arrangement with several New York banks, so they're able to raise money for ransom very quickly. And the show will sometimes have them prepare a ransom, and maybe they're waiting near where the ransom is delivered to take down the suspect, or maybe they'll plant a tracer and a microphone with some of the money, or you know, they'll do what they can to hide the fact that the money has been raised with the help of the FBI, and you know, try and make it look like it really is the person or people who asked for ransom that raised it. And yeah, I was unable to find out what this is actually called, but you know, it's sometimes the agents will go to a place where, you know, for example, a ransom drop. They'll go to a place they expect the suspect to go, and then they'll hide, for example, posing as people who belong there, you know, regular people going about their business. And then when the suspect shows up, they will try to apprehend them. As far as I could tell, it's not, you know, it's not a stakeout, because a stakeout, that means you're, you know, yeah, you're observing, gathering evidence, you know, so yeah, but let's see, and that brings us to 225, 20 seasons. Now, off the DVD, I was unable to rewatch the season 4 opener. But other than that, all of the season openers, season finales, and overall seasons are great for all 7 seasons. You know, there are, I would say I love at least half the episodes, and the rest I at least like. There aren't any that I don't at least like. Like, you can't point to a single episode of this show and tell me to rewatch that episode, and I'll be just absolutely, you know, no way. I will not, you know, I might not want to do it like immediately, but yeah, and there are definitely a few that have problematic elements, but yeah, that's it. Even, yes, even including Rosalind Sanchez episodes. I will admit, originally I thought that maybe she would ultimately manage to remove so much of the enjoyment of the episodes. Honestly, I would say a lot of episodes, maybe most of them, I would rate as 7 out of 10. And then there are a number of 8 or 9, 8, yeah, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, and there are a few that are perfect 10 out of 10. The show does change over the course of it, in some ways for the worse. If you want the very best of the show, it's probably the first 2 seasons. And yeah, I'm gonna, excuse me, once Rosalind Sanchez joins, you know, yeah, you're gonna have to suffer through her gradually improving her acting and such. But I'm not gonna give away when she joins. If you want to know that, that is not difficult information to, IMDb has that exact information without any other spoilers. And I would say around season 5, certainly through season 7, so yeah, it does get to be more like a soap opera. It never becomes fully a soap opera, but it does take some steps in that direction. So if you watch that far into the show, that is something you're going to have to face. For my money, the show never became even remotely unwatchable. And, in some of the later seasons, they even let some of these characters have positive experiences, be happy. And if you're not above getting enjoyment out of some somewhat cheesy or corny stuff, it can be very gratifying to see them be happy. But no, that is definitely, it never became a an actual soap opera. Not, yeah. Okay, so that brings us to 229.00. Critics Pros. That's pros, P-R-O-S, not P-R-O-S-E. Now, from Metacritic, the 26 out of 29 were positive, 2 are mixed, and only 1 is negative. Now, let's see. Yeah, so this reviewer gave it 100 out of 100. Without a Trace uses the gimmick of having the missing person drop in and out of scenes like a ghost as the agents ponder evidence. The device sounds hokey the way it works. It's stylish and involving. Excuse me. As usual, I recommend, if you want to read, I'm not going to read out all of them. Be sure to, you can look it up on Metacritic if you want to read the rest of the reviews. The caliber is very, very high. A gangbusters idea executed with skill and sensitivity. And let's see. Yes. Without a Trace matches and sometimes surpasses CSI for stylish visual storytelling as it builds a timeline that pieces together details of the 24 hours prior to the suspect's disappearance. That's a big, aspect of the show, is trying to piece together, exactly what happened, and it's not that, if the timeline starts here and ends here, it's not that they just get them in order. Sometimes they'll get the middle piece, and but they're always trying to fill out that. The show always looks and sounds good, and sometimes it will dive deep into stylization. When it does, it's always the right choice for that portion. The show could easily get to be really unbearable with way too much stylization, but they know when to use it and when not to. Very frequently will be at the very start and or at the very end of episodes, and it may be limited to very specific flashbacks. It's always effective. Like I said, it might be, a party or some kind of professional, where they really have to perform and such. And there are even a couple of times, at least, where they show things happening from the perspective of someone who has a very altered perspective, and they do absolutely brilliantly at that. Let's see. And yeah, you don't get the same kind of fun gizmo fascination that livens up CSI, but you also don't get the leaden expository dialogue CSI uses to explain those gizmos. I'll have to take their word for it, but I could absolutely imagine. And excuse me. The show appears to be a perfect fit with CSI in that it similarly places more emphasis on procedural puzzles than personality, but whereas CSI is all about physical evidence, Trace is about psychological profiles. And Without a Trace offers sharp writing, stylish directing, and a cast with real chemistry. Sleekly made, absorbing series. Sleek and satisfying, Jerry Bruckheimer's latest is a compelling drama. The resolutions may sometimes be forced, and the characterizations thin, but each episode still has a rhythm and a finality which brings to mind the executive producer's CSI in terms of ensemble performances and crime-fighting handiwork. The clipped dialogue, the scientific detecting, the camera tricks, the computer gamesmanship, the back-and-forth progression of the stories, the bricks that really matter in the construction of a TV show are all quite the same as CSI. Without a Trace ends up delivering enough twists and turns to hold up its end of the basic TV show Your contract. It also visits the cliche corral on occasions. And let's see. And this one has here we go. Without a Trace, The Shrinking Man CSI, produced by Jerry Bruckheimer. Without a Trace follows a yeah. This one gets along. I'm gonna see if there's something specific I wanna instead of reading it whole thing out loud. And and let's see. Yeah, this is slightly amusing. I'm almost 100% certain that the reviewer is being snarky here. Agent Malone has such great intuitive gifts that he can literally see the missing person after taking a quick look at his or her natural habitat. The missing person haunts each episode, appearing and disappearing as clues appear and vanish. You know, obviously, it's not that they know that that's exactly what happened. It's just a visual representation of them figuring this must be, you know, their basic behavior or one experience they've had or something. It's not that they could, you know, literally say exactly what. It's just, it's easier to show it exactly and just, you know, anyway. Without a Trace adopts the requisite cop show clipped pace and poker-faced acting, but the procedural approach is catchy. There's something irresistible about forensic drama that hooks you with hints at the ending and works backwards from there. This one's for the more squeamish sleuth. More squeamish. I guess because it doesn't have a dead body. The but yeah, it is you really want to figure out what was the yeah. Let's see. What happened leading up to that? It takes on a familiar formula with urgency and emotion. attractive but not arty, intelligent but not brainy. This is nothing to build a night around, yet the cast is good, action is crisp, flashbacks are seemingly interwoven, and the dialogue is terse and effective. And let's see. This is another overall. Here we go. Malone is refreshingly underplayed by LaPaglia, and you have the feeling that if he smiled, his face would crack like Humpty Dumpty. Has a fine film noirish vibe and an irresistible mystery hook. It's about the work, about the puzzle. If you want the untidy cop stuff, stick with NYPD Blue. And let's see. Yeah, and then there's one critic that says you know, it's excuse me. The premise doesn't feel real. And they point out, you know, the unlikely, you know, how unlikely it is that the FBI would go for missing persons, which, you know, and that's also, like, if you go on to IMDb, the goofs section, they don't have a missing persons unit, and it would be when people go missing in New York, it's the cops who go looking for them, and you know, it's not a specific unit of the FBI, it's just regular cops who also deal with a bunch of other things, you know. Without a Trace, however, Derivative is a solid program ought to please CSI audiences. And the one negative, they gave it a 30 out of 100. This is essentially CSI without the microscopes, petri dishes, or Marg Helgenberger, if that's how you pronounce her name. Yawn. And let's see, I'm not certain if this section has any, so I guess, yeah, let's just real quick. 239.40 critics users. Let's see. With a strong cast, well-written, this guy gave it a 6 out of 10. With a strong cast and well-written scripts, it is certainly among the best of its genre. Unfortunately, it still suffers from many of the same issues as other procedurals. With cases having to be introduced and solved within the 45-minute time period, each week we are never able to get the sort of in-depth look at the subject matter that shows such as The Wire and The Shield provide. This problem also applies to the characters themselves, with the writers only ever making half-hearted attempts to delve into the personal lives and motivations of law enforcement officers involved. Let's see. And too many cases also seem to involve a leap in logic, whereby someone will make a link they could not possibly make based on a seemingly innocuous piece of evidence or an irrelevant conversation in order to wrap everything up before the episode ends. Anyone who enjoys will certainly involve Without a Trace, but no ongoing plot to draw me back. I have found all more interesting dramas, crime-based or otherwise, available on DVD. Yeah, that was a real short section. And yeah, I'll go ahead and denote this next section. $241.20 critics, users, IMDb. So, like I said, there's 82, and I'm not gonna read aloud everything. I'm just I noted some. Let's see, and Yeah, the I feel like Lenny on Law and Order is my good buddy, even though that show hardly has any character development, whereas the Without a Trace characters seem more like bullet points. The wise, good-hearted leader of the family problems, the tough blonde going through an emotional crisis, etc. The show is okay, but it's really a slick presentation of something that could use a few more IQ points. 90 out of 130 found that helpful. I can see what he means. I don't completely agree, but it it could be better, is what I'm gonna go with. Now, let's see. Excuse me. The stories do draw the viewer in, and the earnest and deliberate means of spelling out the Bureau's investigating a missing case. Good storytelling that is not ordinarily as graphic or dehumanizing as a CSI episode, but still handles the subject matter soberly, sometimes short-sighted. The show may not be my favorite on the telly, but I will watch it if it's on more often than not. That to me seems like a more accurate assessment. Yeah, I guess I should briefly say I'm not saying there's something wrong with the CSI and Law and Order shows. I just do find it more appealing to start with a missing person instead of a dead body. I, yeah. Let's see. And I can see how, if you want the puzzle, but you don't want to look at dead bodies, yeah, this show is not as violent and graphic, or at least it it's not always that. If you open on a dead body, it's hard to, yeah, you know, when people die, it's violent, even if there's no, it's just the nature of it. The body is going to keep fighting to stay alive. I'm going to stop right there before I get into really uh, morbid territory. Given that this show doesn't open on a dead body, and like I said, there are episodes without violence at all, and like, yeah, I don't know if there's like, it would be good if there was like a guide for, what episodes you should skip if you don't want violent stuff, because there are some that have violence. I don't know off the top of my head. Let's see. Excuse me. The single most important relationship in the show, not a romantic relationship so much as a deep personal relationship between two characters who really respect each other even when they fought with each other, was the relationship, between LaPoli's character and Jean Baptiste's character. They were the stars of the show, and the way they agreed but often disagreed about their jobs and their lives made the show the wonderful, poignant success that it was for so many years. I definitely do think that was a really big, and they're also two of the most compelling characters. And then there are several that criticize Rosalind Sanchez, and you know, I've said my piece on that. So there are two kinds of TV shows. First ones that get better than I think this guy gave it a 5 out of 10. Like most of the shows from HBO, for instance, the characters get more elaborate, the story deeper, and the show moves forward, sorry. Then there's the second kind of show that becomes worse the more you watch. Repetitive scripts, shallow characters, logical storyline. Unfortunately, this show belongs to the latter category. I can see what he means. I'm not sure I would necessarily agree entirely with, but yeah. Excuse me. And After reading a half dozen of the reviews, I'm convinced a lot of folks who didn't like it were expecting a typical cop show. It isn't. It may have been an experiment on Bruckheimer's part, turning cop show conventions on their head. First, there's the show's low-key tone. Yeah, 9 out of 10 was the rating. No screaming signs, no melodramatic hooks, no heart-pounding chases or rescues. Chases, yes. When did he write the review? There are. No, he wrote it in 2014. I mean, there are some of those. It's just, it's not, maybe not that frequent. Chases and especially rescues. Oh, well, there we go. I guess I should have just read the next couple of words. Do exist, but like all of the other expositional elements, they're portrayed in measured, deliberate, and muted tones. Just like the team's response to each week's puzzle. All very quiet with just a hint of intensity and a clear demonstration that they care about their victims. All elements that, except for the tone, without a trace, shares with most cop shows, just reversed. Let's see. Yeah, now here's the really radical departure. The show's focus is centered on what are usually the secondary characters, the victims and the lives surrounding them. In fact, most of the team's interactions are with the secondary characters. Think about shows, very good shows like Bones, or Castle, or Burn Notice, or any one of a dozen cop shows, all centered around the team, its interactions. Victims, perps, and puzzles exist mainly to highlight those interactions. This is not a criticism, I love the shows mentioned. My point is simply that Without a Trace reverses those conventions and does it very successfully. On one hand, enough time spent on the team to humanize it, on the other, just enough emphasis on the victims and their stories to elevate them to the primary focus. Takes some getting used to, but well worth the effort. Surprising, those few scenes dedicated to the team, either as individuals or a whole, wind up describing a very rich set of personalities, so we might have to watch a lot of episodes to realize it. Like all cop shows, there are problems with plot integrity and with Without a Trace, the very premise, the FBI getting involved before the local cops in their 48-hour window. And like all cop shows, the inconsistencies and questionable plot lines are simply elements meant to invoke the suspension of disbelief. Nothing more. If this was an experiment on Bruckheimer's part, 7 seasons speak volumes to its success. Yeah. And let's see. Lots of reviews that are said about Rosalind Sanchez. They're right. Excuse me. Just scrolling through since I've said what I wanted to say about her. And it's going to give it a 7 out of 10. Of course, the show was mistitled. The missing always left traces, without which there would have been no stories. The reason for the disappearance varied, more longer the show continued, but the best and most characteristic were variations on the old song, the Raggle, Taggle, Romani, sorry. About a wife who has a seemingly perfect life, rich husband, house and lands, feather bed, runs away from it. And the song The Reason is never disclosed, but on the show, in its best period, a series of interviews would build up a picture of the missing person, gradually revealing what was hidden in his life and in his psyche, so that the story became less police procedural than a character study. Very, very true. And that's, yes. Like I said, I watched some Law and Order and I watched some NCIS, but I really, yeah, I'm not that interested in something that just focuses on, you know, a bunch of dead people and you have to find out who killed the different dead people. I want character study. You know, this and Dexter, I think, are the only 2 shows that I have. Like I said, I don't have all seasons of Dexter, but I don't have any seasons of CSI, Law and Order, NCIS, any of those. The contrast between the victim's outward life and his inner one, which had become intolerable, gave the format a special resonance. The character had become separated from everything around him before he ever took off. He had left already. And let's see. Yeah, okay. I'm just briefly gonna. The biggest error during the show's run was the introduction of Miss Puerto Rico. Not sarcasm, that's literally who she was. A thick accent isn't an insurmountable barrier for an actor, but Rosalind Sanchez, didn't only sound like Desi Arnaz, she sounded like Desi Arnaz playing Ricky Ricardo. She acted like an official greeter at the Puerto Rico Pavilion at the World's Fair rather than a federal investigator, and her breezy posturing, cocking her head, sharkishly flashing her teeth, tapping her toes, striking poses at odd angles like a character out of the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, killed every one of her scenes. But she didn't kill the show, it just ran out of inspiration, and eventually out of cases. But yeah, I don't think she was to blame for the show. Yeah. Now, this review gave it 6 out of 10. As much as I admire Aussie actor Anthony LaPaglia, not a trace to told show about people missing, and he sleepwalks through most episodes. And yeah, you know, I can recommend watching Without a Trace for one reason only. If there is no Law and Order or SVU episode playing, then it's better than nothing. It's like Cold Case or Crossing Jordan. They're good enough to watch while waiting for Law and Order. And I will say Without a Trace is a cut about any of the CSI shows. And let's excuse me. Solidly acted, clever plot twists, is an above average US cop show where FBI agents track down missing persons. Let's see. Jerry Bruckheimer's big screen intellect translated into television proves disarmingly seductive. Excuse me. Interestingly, for a US show, 3 of the lead actors aren't American. And points out LaPaglia and Papa Montgomery. Although led by De Niro lookalike LaPaglia, Without a Trace is very much an ensemble piece, with every character battling to stamp their authority on each case. And excuse me. The real hook of the show, however, is its ability to carefully balance the focus between the cases and the personal lives of its agents, something which has me utterly, completely addicted to the show. I couldn't recommend it any more highly. I agree. It really strikes that balance. I would probably get bored with a show that couldn't strike a good balance. And that might be part of my problem with something like NCIS. I feel like it's constantly about the. I'm not sure I even remember much of the cases. I just remember the character quirks. And this person gave it a 10 out of 10. Almost every episode has its own predicament, and the protagonist is a phenomenal actor. For 40 minutes straight, I was sitting on the edge of my seat. The tension grew every single second. And the smallest details are shown from swept dialogue to how people act in certain scenes. If you like mystery, all caps, you will love this show. And yeah. Ultimately, personally, given that it did gradually have more torture, I'm not, and that it got closer to it. It had soap opera story elements, not soap opera tone. It was never, but it did have kind of, yeah, I'm not gonna give examples because it would spoil, but yeah, it's not like watching, but yeah, it's like how some recent movies have also had soap opera story elements without having actual soap opera. Excuse me. Yeah, but the fact that gradually there was, more torture, and that some storylines got very, soap opera-y. I'm not that unhappy that there aren't more seasons. I would find it. I think I would eventually no longer like it if the yeah if the torture got to be much more present in the show. The soap opera elements would have to go a lot further than they do by the end of the show. But excuse me, let's gotta make sure this thing. Here it is. And this person gave it a 7 out of 10, and subject line of hit or miss. I would attribute the reason for waning interest is because yeah. Let's see. Nah, never mind. That's too much of a spoiler. And yeah, here's a good the about Rosalind Sanchez. She seriously seems like she's reading from a teleprompter. She has a monotonous voice, no emotion at all. Again, I would say that's only true of the first chunk of the show that she's on. But yeah, that is a very good description of it. Let's see. Perhaps as a series, this is what makes Without a Trace so consistently good, though the viewer is not overloaded with the team's angst. On occasions, their private lives and our emotional responses to certain cases do infiltrate the story. Discovering gradually more and more about the five protagonists adds. This is from before Rosalind Sanchez when I got on the show. Adds considerably to the humanity central to the whole theme. People are shown to care, unlike such as ER, the person seems just being excused for the regulars to heated exchanges between each other while applying different paddles and laboratories. It would be difficult to pick out any one accurate praise, though the repressed coiled spring that is Jack, brilliantly by Anthony Powder, serves a special nod. And let's see. Excuse me. Scrolling through reviews, trying to find something that I want to comment on. I guess if I keep talking, there won't be any dead air. Okay, so this person gave it 10 out of 10. Extremely well acting and constructed, masterfully headed by the superb Anthony Apollo. And yeah, yeah, I mean I can see what I mean, yeah. However, I do believe that Rosalind Sanchez should be dispatched forthwith. Her presence unbalances the existing dynamics of the tight-knit characters in the group. Any successful series needs to continue to develop to ensure its success. This is down to inventive writing and intelligent plots. The focus of the series should remain on the dynamics of the existing players and their lives entwined with the stories and how they deal with them. The Delgado character's unnecessary fractures the bond. Kill her off now. See, kill her off, not, yeah. I really appreciate that it's not. I have seen way too many, like, yeah, death threats and like people expressing hope that something bad will happen to someone. Now, let's see. Excuse me. This person gave it an 8 out of 10. LaPaglia's character causes him to speak so. The nature of LaPaglia's character causes him to speak so low and guarded. Even when he is just standing still, you can see the wheels turning in his head, the emotions boiling underneath the surface of the calm veneer that he wears. Very well put. And let's see. This person gave it a 10 out of 10 and actually loves Rosalind Sanchez. What a twist. The characters are flawed, which makes them all the more human. I wouldn't change a thing. Hopefully the writing remains consistent and the show will continue more seasons. And let's see. This person gave it a 10 out of 10. The viewer feels the same as the family of the missing because we get to know them before we even see them. Makes the show pure mysteries, the search through the facades to find the people beneath and the tendencies that may have gotten them into trouble. Now, and I don't know that I agree with this point, but I do think it is worth bringing up. This person gave it a 4 out of 10. Before I started watching this, I thought I would also love the characters, but far from it. For the most part, they are negative and feel like they have given up. Even from the first season, they seem depressed and always negative. I can see what the, yeah. And let's see. Some people come out alive in this and finally reunite with their families, and some do not come out alive. It gives it to the authenticity of the show. And then a spoiler I'm going to read out. And another person saying that Rosalind Sanchez put a damper on the closely knit team. And let's see. The guest appearances also give good performances, and they all bring humanity, sympathy, and credibility to the show. The sets, locations, and design of the show is neat. Headquarters looks great, and so does the rest. Cinematographers do a great job in capturing the mood and feel of the show. They do so by excellent lighting and great-looking shots. And that. It's got the mystery and smarts of CSI without the blood, and it is a relief to find not all victims leave in a body bag. And someone else who likes Rosalind Sanchez. And but that is, yeah, some people do quite like her, and I do understand why. To me, it just, yeah, I've said what I had to say about her. Let's see. This person gave it a 9 out of 10, called Great Show. I love this show. It's almost always great. It does have its weak episodes, but all shows do in their episodes. Children are usually amazing. The acting is almost always amazing. The pacing is wonderful. Haven't come across many filler episodes, and I don't think I've seen any duplicated storylines. And the ones with kids are so touching, I have to agree. They know how to pull on heartstrings and use it well. There are episodes of this that you just can't stop thinking about. It stays with you the rest of the day, sometimes past that. And there are a lot of episodes with shocking endings. You never really know what's going to happen. Sometimes there are so many twists and turns to an episode you'll get dizzy. And further approaching. Okay, on page 81 of 95 of the overall. That's of all the notes I have for this. Someone else who stands up for Rosalind Sanchez. I had forgotten how many of these reviews. That's, I don't know. I guess it just it attracts people with empathy. You know, the show. I'm not saying that. Just, yeah, you know, people who empathize with how the, yeah, a lot of shows have far more hate towards. Yeah, really, it's not that, there's not that much hate. Okay, and 310:30 Wiki, or Wikipedia. And, excuse me, each episode followed the search for one individual under tight time constraints. The stories also focused on the personal lives of the team members and illustrated how their experiences gave them insight into cases. And, excuse me. The real FBI does investigate missing persons. Specifically, they have the authority to help in any mysterious disappearances of children abducted by non-family members. The groups that investigate these crimes are called Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Teams. They get involved in other missing persons cases as needed, but do not have a dedicated unit. One element that set the series apart from other TV police dramas was the display of information about real-life missing persons at the end of most episodes. This resulted in a kidnapped brother and sister being found on July 25th, 2005. At least 5 people have been found as a result of those announcements. That's really great. That's, yeah. And occasionally, such information was replaced with other public service announcements, such as an episode about an attempted suicide, which presented information on a suicide helpline. And Yeah, see, I've never seen an episode that had that since I'm not in the US. And I also, let's see, they also did that in Australia and Hong Kong. Oops. Now, it was the first show to achieve strong ratings opposite longtime NBC hit medical drama ER, which, like Without a Trace, is produced by Warner Brothers Television. And let's see. And this is, yeah, I'm just gonna skip through this. The series received generally positive reviews during its original broadcast. And let's see. Obviously, if you haven't watched the show and you don't want spoilers, there's a bunch of stuff on the Wikipedia page that you can't. Yeah, that's gonna spoil stuff for you if you look at it. And that was, yeah, and at the bottom of the Wikipedia entry, it says see also CSI Crime Scene Investigation, CSI Miami, CSI NY, Cold Case, Missing Persons, and Criminal Minds. But yeah, that covers everything. So I hope I've been helpful. I hope you have either decided to watch at least some of the show or decided to skip the show, depending on, you know, I don't I don't mind if someone watches one of these videos and are like, well, he says a lot of positive things about it, but it's definitely not for me. That's part of what I hope to do. I don't want anyone to get stuck watching something that they really just are not interested in. So I try to be descriptive and yeah. So I hope you enjoyed watching as I enjoyed watching and recording. I'll catch you next time.